Welcome. In this video, we'll be going through verse 24 of Daniel chapter 11. Let's begin by reading it in its context, because this verse serves to introduce Antiochus IV. Let's begin with verse 21. In his place shall rise a contemptible person, on whom royal majesty had not been conferred. He shall come in without warning, and obtain the kingdom through intrigue. Armies shall be utterly swept away and broken before him, and the prince of the covenant as well. And after an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and become strong with a small party. Without warning, he shall come to the richest parts of the province, and do what none of his predecessors had ever done, lavishing plunder, spoil, and wealth on them. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time." End quote. So in this video, we're going to be breaking down verse 24, and it's actually quite a difficult verse. So let's break it down into its two parts. The first part talks about that without warning he should come to the richest parts of the province and do what none of his predecessors had ever done, lavishing plunder, spoil, and wealth on them. Now, it's not particularly clear what the word province here is referring to. As Xiao writes in his commentary, verse 24 is obscure as the NRSV renders it, for the text is unclear as to what the richest part of the province might refer to. End quote. But what is clear from verse 24 is that Antiochus IV was known for his generous gifts, as Newsom writes in her commentary. While extravagant spending and lavish gift-giving were ways in which ancient monarchs demonstrated their power and secured gratitude from their followers, Antiochus IV impressed ancient writers as being excessive even by their standards. See Polybius, Livy, and Josephus. End quote. Now, I want to use this video as an opportunity to read through Polybius and Livy's description of Antiochus IV, and in reading these descriptions, we're going to see that Antiochus was known for his great generosity, therefore verifying verse 24. Before reading Polybius and Livy, let's just finish off reading verse 24. The next part of the verse talks about, "He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time." Again, we can't be too certain as to what this is referring to. Xiao writes in his commentary that it might be referring to the construction of the Acra. He writes, quote, "One may see the end of the verse as an anticipation of his establishment of the Acra, a fortress overlooking the Temple Mount and garrisoned with Jewish renegades and Gentile mercenaries, a move designed in part to support his rich allies in Judea." End quote. We have not yet began talking about the Acra, as this occurs in the second invasion of Judea, which we have not spoken about yet, but it was a fortress that was built near the Temple Mount that many of the Jews found very offensive. So it might be referring to that. Or what I think it's referring to is simply his invasion of Egypt. So Xiao also notes, "Yet one may also take the reference to anticipate Daniel 11:25-28, which concerns his invasion of Egypt." End quote. So I think when it says he shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time, this is referring to his devising of plans to invade Egypt. Okay, having now spoken about all of verse 24, I now want to spend the remainder of this video talking about the character of Antiochus IV, because we have two very thorough descriptions of his character provided by ancient writers, and those are Polybius in book 26 and Livy in book 41. So I want to read through these accounts that these men give us and see how they align with the biblical text. And one way that they absolutely align is, as verse 24 tells us, Antiochus was known for his gift giving. And as we're reading through this account, I'll highlight those portions. Okay, so let's now launch into reading Polybius book 26, his description of Antiochus IV. Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, gained the name Epimanes, madman, by his conduct. Polybius tells us of him that, escaping from his attendance at court, he would often be seen wandering in all parts of the city with one or two companions. He was chiefly found at the silversmiths' and goldsmiths' workshops, holding forth at length and discussing technical matters with the moulders and other craftsmen. He used to condescend to converse with any common people he met, and used to drink in the company of the meanest foreign visitors to Antioch. Whenever he heard that any young men were at entertainment, he would come in quite unceremoniously with a fife and a procession of musicians, so that most of the guests got up and left in astonishment. He would frequently put off his royal robes and, assuming a white toga, go round the marketplace like a candidate, and taking some by the hand and embracing others, would beg them to give him their vote, sometimes for the office of aedile, and sometimes for that of the tribune. Upon being elected, he would sit upon the ivory curule chair, as the Roman custom is, listening to the lawsuits tried there, and pronouncing judgment with great pains and display of interest. In consequence, all respectable men were entirely puzzled about him, some looking upon him as a plain, simple man, and others as a madman. His conduct too was very similar as regard the presents he made. So let's pause here a moment. This is where he's going to begin talking about the lavish gifts he gives. So this is where it aligns with verse 24. Let's continue. To some people he used to give gazelle knucklebones, to others dates, and to others money. Occasionally he used to address people he had never seen before when he met them and make them the most unexpected kind of presents. But in the sacrifices he furnished to cities, and in the honors he paid to the gods, he far surpassed all his predecessors. Take note how this language is very similar to what we read in verse 24. His gift-giving surpassed his predecessors. We continue. As we can tell from the temple at Olympian Zeus at Athens, and the statues round the altar at Delos. He also used to bathe in public baths when they were full of common people, having jars of the most precious ointments brought in for him. On one occasion, when someone said to him, "How lucky you are, you kings, to use such scents and smell so sweet," he answered nothing at the time, but the next day, when the man was having his bath, he came in after him and had a huge jar of the most precious ointment called start, poured over his head, so that all the bathers jumped up and rolled themselves in it, and by slipping in it created great amusement, as did the king himself. End quote. So there is the description of Antiochus IV given to us by Polybius. Let's now move on to our second description given to us by Livy, which reads, Antiochus, setting up an ivory chair in the Roman fashion, would administer justice and adjudge disputes on the most trifling matters, and so incapable was his mind of sticking to any station in life as it strayed through all the varieties of existence, that it was not really clear either to himself or to others what kind of person he was. It was his habit not to speak to his friends, to smile at mere acquaintances in a most friendly way, and with an inconsistent generosity to make himself and others laughingstocks. To some, men of distinction, who held themselves in high esteem, he would give childish presents, as of food or toys. Others, who expected nothing, he would make rich, and so he seemed to some not to know what he wanted. Some said he was playing childish tricks, some that he was unquestionably insane. Nevertheless, in two great and important respects, his soul was truly royal. Let's pause here a moment. This is where it's going to talk about the lavish gifts he gives. So yet again, this is where it aligns with verse 24. In his benefaction to cities, and the honors paid to gods, to the people of Megapolis in Arcadia, he promised that he would enclose their city with a wall, and he gave the greater part of the money. At Tigger, he began to build a magnificent theatre of marble. In Pisantium at Zeus, this is the central hall of the city, where those men dine upon whom their distinction has been bestowed, he furnished a golden service for one table. While he gave the Rhodians nothing remarkable, yet he gave them gifts of every description, whatever their needs demanded. Of his magnificent ideas as to the treatment of the gods, the temple of Jupiter, Olympus at Athens, the only one in the world which, though unfinished, was designed to conform to the greatness of the god, can well be evidence. Besides, he also adorned Delos with marvelous altars and abundance of statuary, and at Antioch he built a magnificent temple to Jupiter Capitolinus, which had not merely its ceiling panelled with gold, but also its walls wholly covered with gilded plates, and many other things he promised in other places, but by reason of the very short duration of his reign he did not finish them. Also in regard to the splendour of his shows of every sort he surpassed earlier kings. His other spectacles being given in their own proper style and with abundance of Greek theatrical artists. A gladiatorial expedition, after the Roman fashion, he presented, which was at first received with greater terror than pleasure on part of the men who were unused to such sights. Then, by frequent repetitions, by sometimes allowing the fighters to only go as far as wounding one another, sometimes permitting them to fight without giving quarter, he made the sight familiar and even pleasing, and he roused in many of the young men a joy in arms. And so while at first he'd been accustomed to summon gladiators from Rome, procuring them by large fees, finally he could find a sufficient supply at home. End quote. So that concludes our description of Antiochus IV given to us by Livy. So hopefully these two accounts just give us a deeper appreciation for the character of Antiochus IV, since he is the central figure of Daniel 11. As always, if you're enjoying these videos, your support would be greatly appreciated, so please consider supporting me on Patreon. Find the link in the description below. An ongoing donation of even just $1 a month would mean a great deal to me, so please consider giving if you're in the position to do so. If donating isn't something you're able to do, it's still tremendously helpful if you hit that like button and leave a comment. Finally, make sure you're subscribed to get my next video. Thank you for watching until the end, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.